Thank you. Well, I moved into Grand Rapids here a couple of years ago. I have 3 daughters, and they all came over to Calvin College. And they searched and searched and searched and found some Dutch boys. And got married. And my wife and I, there's no question, if our kids are going to settle in one area, we'll stalk them. And so we moved over here a couple of years ago, which was an interesting transition, moving companies and everything. But part of that as a father that's extremely neat is my kids all were very successful and able to get a job elsewhere, but all chose to come back to work with us. And the sons-in-laws are all involved in one of the companies, either as board of directors or president or whatever. And it's pretty cool to be able to do that. Now we just got to figure out what we pass down and what we manage and whatever. But the topic that I was given today was what I learned from working with the Detroit Red Wine CEOs like Microsoft and Johnson & Johnson and Gates and some of those people. And I think it'd be easier to say what I unlearned from working with them. I grew up in a town of 2,500 people. And my father was a fairly influential guy. He was the mayor in town. And he was a guy that really made a difference in that community. In fact, he got the first stoplight. And that was a big thing. I always wondered, why do we need a stoplight? There's nobody. And then I realized when I got pulled over for drag racing, there is a reason for a stoplight in a small town, and it's to give the light to go so you can drag it. So I was there when I was 16. I went to college, and some people will say, "Well, were you bright?" And I said, "No, my dad needed to get reelected, and it was best that I leave town." But I started into college, and my goal in life was very simple, and that was to go back to my hometown and try to make a difference. And that was it. And anything that is done since then, I've done with my heels dragging. Don't want to do it in many ways. So it's kind of interesting how God takes a twist at things. So when I went from Ferris to University of Michigan to Harvard, my first residency and interest was in cardiovascular medicine. And at Harvard, I ran across a lot of very successful people who were very good at business, but very, very poor in the way they did life. And we would give them a new way of doing things, and they didn't change. So you just had a heart attack. You just survived. All we need you to do is these few behavioral changes, and they didn't. And at that particular time in my life, I think was when the clarity that God put on my purpose in life came in. And it has been, the clarity of what I do is there. How I do it is way beyond anything that I could have imagined. So what came to me at that particular point is these people are disciplined. These are people that run major companies. These are people that really know what they're doing. But personally, they're falling apart. And I kept thinking of Apostle Paul, why do I do what I don't want to do? And then when I came back to my hometown, I've never applied for a job. My dad got it for me. And I came in and I ran emergency rooms and various things of that nature. And then there was a alcohol drug rehab center that was opening up, and there was a very influential physician in town who, the reason they started that was his wife was alcoholic, and most importantly, he wanted his girlfriend to run it. And they came to me and they said, look, you have a background in neuropharmacology, you understand the brain, and how would you like to take over and manage this alcohol drug rehab? At that particular voice, the clarity of what I do really came, and I actually, and you guys know this, is one of the, that won't read. One of the verses that I really fell in love with and said, this is where I'm all about, is Isaiah 61:1, where it says, I'm going to set the captives free. I thought captives meant people who had alcohol and drug dependency. I was very blessed at 26 to get a presidential appointment where I wrote the National Treatment Protocols for Emergency Medicine for behavioral emergencies. Spent research doing that, started with hospitals, and I'm not going to go through the journey. What I'm going to say is, basically, when people come to me and they say, I'd love to work with Fortune 100 people, I'm telling you, you can't apply for that job. 18 years of digging in the dirt, working hard, doing what God called me to do, they called me. Everything that you see on this chart, which is where we have gone everywhere from winning Microsoft's Healthcare Company of the Year to we've been the top 5 best in the world. You'll see alcoholism rehab. Then you're going to see that I get a call from Mike Ilitch to take on the Red Wings. Said, I don't want to do it. I don't have time for it. I'm thinking, God, you're taking away from the captives that I'm supposed to be working with. What am I doing with these guys? Well, Mike's pretty persuasive, so I took on the Wings, and I realized they were captive. And then ended up working in the Fortune 100 world, and I'm going, they are captive. I had defined captive as thinking somebody with alcohol and drug dependence. God had kind of given me the vision that captive are people who are doing what they don't want to do. King James Version kind of is like, why do I do what I don't want to do? I'm married to my wife, Vicky, so the Queen Vicky version of it is, why do you keep doing the stupid things over and over again? I like her translation a little bit better. So throughout the time, going through working with Fortune 100 executives and professional sports, and then we decided that, you know, there's 1.8 billion people who will never see a physician. And they're captive within their life. And so we took on global medicine there. So the pathway, which it would be very interesting, and I thought about this, with all of our different companies, all of our offices throughout, all of the various things that we do, is, this is not today, but my personal timeline has the highs and the lows. It has the highs and the lows of the demands on you mentally, the demands on you physically, the demands on you spiritually, the demands on your brain. Each of us have those timelines. And I'm not going there because I'm here to talk about what I have learned. I have not learned how technology works. So again, like I said, I'm going to buzz through about 10 slides that I just sat down and said, what'd you learn? And then I want to talk about them, and then the slideshow's over. Because if you make a slideshow for me, I change it anyway. Where am I supposed to be pointing this? At you?
It should work there. I'll change it for you.
When I feel I am important, I miss what is important. That's the first thing that I learned about working with Fortune 100 people. When I get home, I zone out rather than zone in. When I state my opinion, I want you to know they are really facts. I can often forget that emotion will trump logic in most relationships. My physiological reward is often different than my psychological or spiritual reward system. I want to hone in on that. My perception is the truth. I'm raising my kids out of convenience, not commitment. Real success is only identified when I have lost it. I look at God in one of two ways: what He can do for me or what He has done to me. And when I do commencements and things, I said, you have to understand there's three questions that are going to be asked of us. The first one that's everybody asks us, whenever you go anywhere socially, is, what do you do? My kids have never been able to identify that with me until my youngest came along, and they went to a private Christian school, and they all had the same teacher when they hit like 4th grade, and it's, bring your daddy in and have him do something. They were very disappointed. So the first one was like, I don't know what my dad does. He's written books or something, I don't know. Second one says, I don't know. The third one got it. He mostly raises horses. So, what do you do? The second thing is that we're asked is, who are you? And that might be, well, I'm the CEO of a company, or that I'm this and this and this, or I might be a father. But the question that all of us are asked, and very few of us really answer, and I find the vast majority of Fortune 100 executive athletes don't, is why are you? Why are you here? You will make a decision, by the way, and you will answer that question. And you'll either have an answer that says, I'm here to get what I can get. I'm here to make a difference on me and my family and my people. Or I'm here to team up with people to see if together we can make a difference. Our family's model is very simple, because we've lived the world's better life. It's that simple. Now, why are these concepts so easy to learn yet so difficult to change? Every one of us, me, I fight with almost every one of those. And I think the interesting thing is because what I learned from corporate executives is mediocrity they don't like. There's no such thing as mediocrity. What's that mean? If you're not in favor of mediocrity, then you're also in favor of success. So the closeness between I don't want to be mediocre and I want to be successful is a very, very interesting border when you get there, because some of these things now start coming out. Because if I'm successful in what I do, then I also think I must know something. And if I also think I must know something, then it's easy for me to think that I know the best. This is everything we fight with. This is why Jesus Christ, when he talked about anger, is so close to murder. Confidence is so close to arrogance. Success, being somebody who pays attention to detail, is so close to being controlling. Somebody who is very visionary, such as me, and I'm also a risk taker, is so close to having to be, it's so thin, the distance between that and saying, what about frustration with people who don't think your way? What about people who don't get it? What about this? I think when you look at all of these things, it is so close. The difference that happens between whether I think one way or the not has to do with your heart. But I'm going to talk about your brain. We are hardwired. And when we don't understand how we are hardwired, it's hard for us to understand our heart and why we do certain things. So it's rather interesting. I think the reason why we keep fighting these things is we really never have learned something about us. We talk about emotional health, or mental health, whichever way you want to call it. We talk about physical, we talk about spiritual, all of us take care of that. Do you know anything about your brain? Do you know why you do what you don't want to do? Why that brain does that? Do you know, like, if you want to stress me out, ask me to curl up by the fire and read a book. Holy smokes, that's so stressful. Do you know that? Do you know that about you? And it's we take off into life with something that we were fearfully and wonderfully made, and yet we don't understand it. One more slide. So, as I've gone through, I'm trying to correlate for you today some really cool research. I'm doing a lot of research in the area of the brain and its behavior and what happens. And there's some things that I look back and I'm going, you know, I get asked a lot of times, wow, you're such a scientist, you've written all these books, you do all of this sort of stuff, and yet you seem to be a Christian. How do those fit? And I'm saying the more you understand, the more it has to fit. If you understand the brain, which is, I love this field, that's why I left cardiovascular into this field, is I'll die and never have the answers. I love that. What's this mean, the sins of the parents to the third and fourth generation? I don't like the term sin, but what does that mean? And we're going to talk about genetics. What does it mean? For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. Do you realize your perceptions, whether they're right or wrong, are stored in your brain as truth? If you understand that, it's interesting. When I get in an argument with my wife, I'm wondering, why is she trying to argue to be wrong? I know I'm right, but guess what? She knows she's right. So I'm like, what? Romans 7. That's that. Why do I do what I don't want to do? Why do you, when you get home and if you have small kids and they say, look at this picture, and you're all stressed out, you really don't see the picture? Why is it when your wife says to you, I want to talk about my mother? That's a good one to zone out on. It is absolutely. There's a no-win, because if you say, this, let me tell you the truth, you're in trouble. If you ignore it, you're in trouble. So, yeah, whatever. And in 1 Corinthians, this is a fascinating. Everything is permissible to me, but not everything is beneficial. Everything is permissible for me, but I will not be mastered by anything. What masters you? Is that I'm stressed out and I want that drink at home? Not an alcoholic, but it still masters you. Does it master you? I feel insecure and I want sex with my wife and I haven't really treated her right? Is it I go into a meeting and I walk out and I want to be in charge, and if people don't agree with me or don't like me, I'm in trouble? What is it that masters us? And I don't know whether I've worked through this self-defense, because my life, that I walked through my life, has been one, I don't think like other people. And frequently my wife will say, don't forget, with my people, don't be you. And she's actually complimenting me. So when people ask you, what do you think? They really don't want to know. And you'll tell them, you don't do that. You know, and so it's like, well, what they ask? They said, well, they usually ask people that won't tell them. They're not aware that you will say, you know. And so there's various things. So you know, I probably had to look through this because of my own personality, and that's a different story. My own walk. So going through all of the crazy research, come down to saying, we've been dealt a deck of cards. Some of you, perhaps it's not a full deck, such as Bob. But there's others of you that have a deck of cards. And do you realize the dynamics of what that deck means to you? I want you to connect one thing. There's a term you'll hear, and I'm not going to go into the physiology of it, but your brain chemistry is the major determinant of your behavior. You go, whoa, 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 whoa. What you think affects your brain chemistry. What you believe affects your brain chemistry. What you do or do not do affects your brain chemistry. What you eat or do not eat affects your brain chemistry. Brain chemistry is the middle of the road that drives our behavior. Why do we use drugs? Why do we use Prozac? Why do we use Adderall? Because they change neurotransmitters of brain chemistry, which changes our behavior. Why do I drink coffee in the morning? I drink it to change my brain chemistry. You may not know this, but you're changing your brain chemistry all the time. Now, the important part of understanding all of this is you start out, and the first card you're dealt is you have a genetic card, a body card. Each of us are physically very different. I don't know if you know that, but if you carry body fat in your gut versus in your butt, you respond differently to different types of foods and how it affects your brain chemistry and how it affects your diseases. We're predisposed to different diseases because of that. We're predisposed to various diseases that we will get. And yet most of us don't even understand how that fits. The second thing is what we have, a physiological reward center. Physiological reward center, it basically says this: your brain has no morals. What feels good to your brain will be repeated. This is part of the battle that we fight. You take risk-taking behavior, vision, it has the same reward as sexual promiscuity and anger, etc. By understanding how those behaviors. Why do you think some of the greatest spiritual teachers in the world are television evangelists, end up with sexual addiction? Because that power that it does to your brain is the same thing that sex does to your brain. And I think that's what Jesus Christ is talking about when he's saying, where's the part to differentiate this? It's the heart, which we're going to talk about. So, many of you have tried doing things, changing behaviors. Very simply, if you don't get a physiological reward center, you won't change. What you've probably been going on, what you should do, not what you will do. Do you know what you will do versus do you know what you should do? We all know what we should do because people tell us that all the time. But the question is, what will I? You don't understand how that brain triggers. Like I said, you ask me to be compliant, real compliant on a healthy diet. I'm probably not. You say, you know, you shouldn't have that red meat, and I say, well, what if I do? Well, you got to run a couple miles. Deal, I'll do it. So understanding that is very important. Understanding. I grew up, when my daughter was born, I thought, you know what, I'm going to be a total failure being a father. I'm not even good at this stuff. My wife sits down and reads books. And I can remember when my oldest daughter was about 3, and I'm thinking, you know what, I've got to learn this bit because this kid's going to be with me for a while. And I sat there and I'm going, okay, I'm going to be a good father. And I can remember sitting down with her to read a book. I said, come on, Nicole, let's read a book. Spot, runs. I'm like, yo, kid, give me that book. Let me help you, because I think we'll get through 3 or 4 books by the time you get through this one. And she's like, Daddy, I don't want to read books with you. My kids climb. They've been climbing with me in the front pack since they were 4 months old. I do things with my kids. I have the most unbelievable relationship, but I still can't sit down and read a book. Understanding my physiological reward is based upon what I call arousal. It's the gas pedal one. I love anxiety. I love when projects aren't done. I love conflict. I love 15 things going on at any given time. I don't care if any of them get done. I love that. I love the challenge. You look at me, I'm unemployable. I can't keep a job. You know, we own all these companies. Why? Because I take it to a certain point, I'm incompetent and disruptive. I got to turn it over to somebody else. On the other hand, you may be what we call a satiation, which I don't like lists. I'm going to make lists and I'm going to check them off. Often you're married to the opposite. My wife is a satiation person who loves lists, and she gives it to me, and she said, did you see the list? I said, I don't know where I put it. You know? Knowing your brain reward center will change you from being hopeless to having hope, because you know what you will or will not do. My first book, which is a book on addiction, I said, alcoholism is not a disease of denial, which we think about. It's a disease of hopelessness. And it's hopeless because we give them a treatment we think will work and it won't. And so they're going to deny they have anything because they don't want to have something that nobody can fix. We have an environment card. Now I'm going to do the brain one first. We have a brain card. If you take your neurotransmitters, you don't know yours. So let me give you an example. I'm a guy that overexpresses a chemical called dopamine. Dopamine is your gas pedal chemical. That also means that when it converts, it turns into adrenaline, which means that when it's a little bit up, I'm highly creative, I'm highly energetic. You tell me something can't be done, and I'm like, oh yeah, watch it. I love it. I love the challenge. I love when people disagree with me. It makes me think. But if it gets a little bit too high, and I'm going to refer to this, the bell ringer. When your heart and your brain aren't connected, the bell will ring. And when that bell rings, that's a change in your neurotransmitter, and you do things that you don't want to do. And I'm even going to say, and this will be a great spiritual discussion, you can't make a difference. You can't change it up to that point. What happens with me? When my bell rings, which means my dopamine's a little bit too high, I'm scattered, I'm impulsive, I make decisions without all the information, my listening skills go down the toilet, I get task-driven. I can't change that. I can't change that. My wife, who has a different neurotransmitter system, when she gets stressed, she gets very detailed. And so when we're both stressed, and I come in and I'm saying, how was your day? I want to hear, bills paid, kids alive, life's good. No more detail. When she's stressed, she wants to tell me. And I'm trying to pay attention. I learned a long time ago, oh yeah, you know, they tell you in some of these psychology courses to repeat back what you heard. Well, I got to do that. It's like, I just told you that 5 minutes ago. So that didn't work because I didn't listen to it the first time. I can't change at that point. But if you don't know that, you get into these fights. And what's fascinating is I can take any of you and give you too much dopamine and you do the same thing as I do. I do any of you and drop your serotonin, you do the same thing she does. We have an environment card. Our brain is fascinating. The first 12 years of development, our brain is actually undergoing some significant changes. It is trying to determine, basically inside, how fast is fast enough, how slow is slow enough. And if you look at it and you take an infant, and you'll see, first of all, they have gross coordination, and they have things like that, but they get fine and fine motor skills. Take that developing brain and subject it to trauma. Whether that's a divorce or sometimes it's staying together. Whether that is a child died or whether that your father was an alcoholic. Or perhaps it was, I'm going to put you in front of the TV and I'm going to let the TV run. I'm going to give a Nexus to you. I'm going to give you this in front of you. I want you to stay entertained with technology. Your brain develops a fast pace as being a normal pace. We frequently diagnose that as ADHD. And yet there's only about 20% of ADHD is either D2 or neuronal issues. The rest is, my brain has learned to go fast. What happened to you during those days determines your decisions today, determines your effectiveness of what you are, determines when you choose mediocrity or when you choose something different. Finally, we have a belief system. Our belief system is filtered by two different things. Most of us are very good at understanding the one. Our environment, what we've been taught, all of that affects what perhaps I should do. Sets the standard. There's something that comes before that. And that is, what I believe to be true and what I believe should be true have to be consistent. Do you know if you take your brain chemistry and you're stressed, and in me, with my dopamine, my stress would be, I get insecure actually. Because I take this concept, if I can't make you better, I don't know enough. I define treatment failure as my failure to understand enough about you to give you the right treatment. Nobody wants to be overweight. Nobody wants to be unhappy. That puts a lot of pressure on me. So when somebody doesn't change, it's my fault because I didn't know enough. And I might get insecure. And I go home and I haven't yet screwed up as a father. I haven't screwed up as a husband yet. But I'm insecure in those spaces too. Our brain chemistry will drive our perception. Those of you who have low serotonin and something negative happens, you're going to take on the responsibility. It's your fault. I did it, even if you didn't. The negative thinking, it affects whether we eat or not. Our brain shuts off at certain times based on our brain chemistry. So what I learned with executives is the same thing that I learned with addictive people, same thing I learned with everybody. We're all pretty much captive. And part of our captivity is we don't understand enough about our brain to understand what I'm doing or what it's going to do automatically. So, to kind of bring it together, we can change that. There's not the doom and gloom of hardwired. So for example, I said there was a bell that rings. And in my case, I have what's called pre-warning signs. You have pre-warning signs that your brain chemistry is going to change, it's going to trigger, and you're going to do something that you don't want to do, or you may suffer from mediocrity, or whatever it is. For me, my ciliary muscle twitches, my jaw will tighten, my palms will get sweaty, and my heart rate will go up before my dopamine bell rings. By knowing that, I can keep my bell from ringing. Once the bell rings, I can't change my behavior. But I know, for example, I can prescribe, I know short burst exercise stimulates tyrosine hydroxylase, which means it burns up my dopamine. I know that. I know when that bell's about ready to ring, I better watch out for the amount of tyrosine that I eat in my food because that makes dopamine, the amount of coffee that I drink. I also realize that when I'm out of balance, what feels best to me is keeping me out of balance. So if you don't know anything about your brain and you say, well, that felt good, it's probably because it's maintaining where you are, which is out of balance. And we're all out of balance. I'm out of balance either because of the genetics that I came from. Do you realize if both of your, let's say, grandparents, and we do this clinically predictive stuff, so your grandparents, if both of them, well, or you have one, whatever, it's just different weighting, a history of compulsiveness, addictions, obesity, or dementia, and then your parents have a little bit of that, and then you might have that. Do you realize that it's a significant likelihood that on chromosome 17, your SLC6A4 is off? Do you realize that'll cause a low serotonin, that'll cause you to be compulsive, that'll cause you to be driven, that'll cause you to be task-driven? That'll cause that? Do you realize that? But do you know also that you can upregulate that if you know what's going on, because our brain is so resilient? But if you don't know what's going on, what feels best is keeping that down and regulated. It's like what feels best to an alcoholic? Drinking. What feels best to a corporate executive who's a workaholic? Working. What feels best to us who are striving for significance? Whatever it is we're striving for. And we're all striving. Some strive with money, some strive with things. My weakness is I like to be smart. And thank goodness that I use my own perception, so. I can be smart, and still, as my wife says, you're kind of a brilliant idiot. There's various ways of looking at that. But that would be my downfall. And I would have a very difficult time. I do believe everybody is very good at what they're doing. I just am not smart enough to know, why are you not any good at something I can figure out? So, it's one of those things that you have to look at. So by understanding, we literally, if we don't understand the behaviors, the activities that we do are what maintain our out of balance. I love red meat. I love the more caffeine you give me, the better off I am. I love running all the time. I love going 90 miles an hour, and that means my bell's going to ring and I am going to be, quote unquote, as my wife calls an ass. Although now she's very sophisticated. She says, your dopamine's high. I said, thank you for changing it. So you mean I'm an ass? And she says, yeah. But now when I walk in and she looks at that and she says, I said, you know what, before we have a conversation, you want to go in the workshop or do you want to go run? And when I look at her, she gets up and I look at her and I'm going, this is going to be a negative day, isn't it? And she says, you bet it is. And she says, so if I'm talking, don't try to give me any solutions. I don't want solutions. Because my serotonin's down. Why? Because of her genetics. Because of the way she was raised. So we will do, if we don't know, what keeps us out of balance. And you say, well, I'm not out of balance. If you weren't born with it, something, pretty lucky. If you didn't have an environmental dynamic that happened, then the next thing says long-term stress does change our brain chemistry. And what is long-term stress? I love our studies. If you work, you're stressed. If you don't work, you're stressed. If you're married, you're stressed. Oh, but if you're single, you're stressed. If you have kids, you're stressed. But if you don't have kids, you're stressed. So when these guys would come to me and they say, can I decrease my stress? And I said, yeah, that's probably lethal injection. Outside of that, I think the issue is how do I handle more stress and not have it affect me negatively. We can't not have stress. So kind of in conclusion, the world I live in is how do I look at what's going on? You know, there's 287,000 variables each of you have that drive who you are, that we found so far. So how do I look at an athlete and I say, how do you want to perform? Do you need to be quick and fast and reactive? And by the way, you need to be out of balance to do what you do at this time, but how do I shut it off? Corporate executives, the only difference between what I showed you here, that looks like a Sunday school sermon, is we have them all too. The difference is the bell rings. And we all have that way. Or we know the bell's going to ring and we don't let it ring. So in closing, I'll give you what I call, and it was in, I think, my third book, I call it the Robertson theory of the crap pile. Until I have a lot of class. I was sitting out on my deck, having a cup of coffee, and I had a miniature pony that had 7 acres of pasture to run in. She has a little run-in shed that she can come in and go out. And then at night she'd go into the place stalls where all the other horses were. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching her out in the pasture. She raises her tail. She comes trotting into the shed and she takes a crap. I took it personally. She had 7 acres to take a crap. Not my problem. She crapped in my barn. It's not my problem. And I thought about that, and it didn't take long before I said, you know, my kids are crapping in my barn. My wife craps in my barn. The government's crapping in my barn. And then I got a little more insightful. I said, I'm crapping in my own barn. And I think about it, and I'm going, I got a bunch of shit in my barn. And if you're like me, I don't know what it is, whether it's Mexican food or whatever, but I wake up every once in a while like, life is changing today, right now, because I'm on it. And it's kind of like walking out in the crap pile, putting a pitchfork in the bottom of the crap pile and pulling up as hard as you can, and you end up face down in the crap pile. You don't change. What I love about the work that we do, what I'm passionate about the work that we do, is it helps you to perceive the shit that's in your life. You get up there with one pitchfork at a time, you can clean it out. But if you don't want any more crap in your barn, you've got to learn how to close the barn door. And that's a spiritual issue. That's a hard issue. That is a hard issue. That is where Jesus Christ said, guard your heart. What does that mean to me as a scientist? Pay attention that your brain's going to change and do something, because when it changes, you're going to do what Apostle Paul says. I don't want to do what I'm doing. So, are there any questions? No? You got it down pat? Yes, I can tell you some interesting stories. I have to be very careful about executives, such as one of my favorite people is Bill Gates, but at any rate, I can't go specifics because of the doctor-patient relationship. That's a fun story.
So, I have a number of friends who have a lot of these dysfunctions, like Bob. So, if Bob needed some individual help to personalize training, where would Bob go? Where would Bob read?
This guy right here, Mark. Raise your hand up. So Mark, I work in the world of, our companies are set up as the Robin Hood theory of medicine. We take money from people who have money and we give it to the poor. So we have a 501c3 public charity. That public charity, which is Robertson Research Institute, is the world I live in. We just took on the Grand Rapids police officers and said, you know, they got a tremendous amount of stuff going on. And actually in 8 weeks dropped their health inhibitors 52%, their performance inhibitors 64%, and relationships 74% in 8 weeks. So we're taking on, that's amazing. And the reason why is because you're doing pre-Pavlovian changes. So Mark, we do concierge medicine 2 ways. You can go to Mercy with concierge medicine. If you don't want to go through that expensive process, then you can go through our expensive process. So we support research in that arena, and that's one way, but that usually the whole health and whatever. But if you've got a physician, basically it's a process where we have a physiological survey that goes through the 87,000 variables. We set up, and you will get a session with me. I'm the guy of what's broken. I have passion and vision, I have no clarity. Yeah, that's not my skill set. So then you meet with somebody who sets down and says, what are your goals? What do you want to do? If you're an athlete, for example, we'll find people that want to do whatever. If you're an executive, or we can just say, here's what's broken, what do we want to do? Then you have a one-on-one and a personal strategic plan, and you come back with me in 8 weeks. So Mark can set any of that up. Or company-wise, we do it with companies. We've got written up for saving a company $180 million by just putting people into the right place at the right time, working at their optimal.
Before we go on, if any of you want, we have a video, and if any of you want some of the stuff that's up here, just sign your name on this sheet. We'll just kind of pass it around, just print your name, and we'll send it to you, probably Monday or whenever you get it edited, and give that to you.
Joe, email address? Do you need an email address?
Oh, no, because we'll have your email, I would think. If you've been here before and you've signed up and you get emails from us, just give us your name.
At what point in your past did you become a believer?
I was a believer at 6 years of age.
Oh, okay.
I came from my dad came from the hills of West Virginia. In fact, a little bit about that story, which is, people ask me, how do you get a job that deals with all these people? And how can you be friends with the president of India and the crown prince in Saudi? How do you do that? And it's like, because you don't want to do it. Quite honestly, I never applied for it. Never asked to write a book, and written 14 books. All I did is I had this clarity that says, God's given me a gift to try to figure out how to get people out of captivity. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that very well. I'm going to know what I'm no good at, and the rest of it, I got dragged into. I did not want to do that because I thought that was against God's plan of captivity until I realized how captive athletes were. And then when I got into that executive world, they call me because they make more money. They call me because their companies are more profitable initially. And then all of a sudden they call me because their life is better. And what's fascinating as a believer is I'm an informatics, mathematics sort of guy, which creates the mathematic predictive values sort of stuff. Over 70% of the executives that I deal with, whether they are Muslim, whether they're Hindu, whether they're in India, or they're in wherever they are, I'm able to talk about Jesus Christ. Because it absolutely comes up when you start talking about the heart and staying in balance. And when you realize that those behaviors that do good can't be done good because of the way we're hardwired, and then you can get a conversation about sin and Christ and whatever. That's unbelievable to me. And probably the most rewarding is their better husbands and wives and parents.
So I have 2 kids at home, and the brain environment resonates because they're both from broken childhoods. One is 4 and one is 20. We're in deep counseling with regard to all of these factors. So what you say today resonates in that area. Now, the people that I work with are telling me that you have to reprogram their neurotransmitters because the dopamine and the serotonin are where they're at because of the trauma that they've had.
Right.
As I'm listening to you, you're saying that's not reprogrammable, it's a matter of the heart and spirituality. And I think in their maturity, and I think if it's what I'm doing right now futile until they have maturity of heart and spirituality, or
Yeah, so you got two things going on here is everybody focuses on the neurotransmitters. You can change your neurotransmitters anytime you want. It's the up and down regulation of the enzymatic responses that keeps you stuck. So by prescribing changes in neurotransmitters consistently, you can up or down regulate those enzymes. So there is a way to reprogram it, but you can't reprogram it to stay. You've got this one of getting in balance is really a physiological understanding that reprogramming the brain. Staying is definitely a spiritual issue of heart. One of the things that we do, if you guys come from long family history, and especially with businesses that own, we actually map the genetics of the people who started it. You know, usually the founder assumes their kids are like them. Don't forget, they got your spouse in there. And their genetics are different, their behaviors, their automatic responses to things, and then you can go down to each generation and find out what are the diseases we're passing on down, what are the behaviors we're passing on down, what's the way we're thinking and our perceptions that's being passed down. And you can map that all out. That's kind of fun. Any other questions? Well, I appreciate a little bit of me being able to share my passion and what God's kind of called me to do. And by the way, from a little spin-off of Bob, it took me a while because I thought I was failing as a Christian until I realized that God called me to be a seed planter, not a deal closer. And when I was comfortable about being a seed planter, I had no problem talking to a crown prince in Saudi about Jesus, because it's the Holy Spirit that has to close the deal. And by me not going there, I have a greater influence to be able to do that. And that was a little tough, because I was wondering, coming from a Baptist background, where's that notch? I don't have them. Somebody else got them. Thanks.
Thank you for doing this. Thanks for educating us this morning. In case you walked in after we started, this is our last meeting for the season. We'll start again the 3rd.